Welcome to Bookstr Business. I'm joined by Ben Feder. He is the author of Take Off Your Shoes. How you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me.
You have your shoes on.
I do. In my mind, they're off, but in my feet, they're on.
Okay, so once you took off your shoes, you kept them off then.
I did.
Yeah. So what exactly happened? Because you actually have a big name behind you. I see that you were had some business experience and you were behind developing the games like Grand Theft Auto.
Grand Theft Auto, NBA 2K, Bioshock. If you're a gamer, you know a lot of our games.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm not a gamer and I know what Grand Theft Auto is.
Right.
That was part of like the zeitgeist of being a millennial.
Right. Well, it's more than millennials. It's pretty mainstream. But,
yeah, absolutely. So what was the business like?
So first of all, I mean, just to set the record straight, I was on the business side. I was the CEO of the company, and it wasn't actually the developers. So the developers kind of do their own magic, and
Sure,
I was running the company. I mean, it's an amazing thing. The video game business is one of the most extraordinary businesses that I've been in. I've been in a few. And every year it just gets more and more exciting, more and more diverse. The audiences get bigger and bigger. The budgets get bigger and bigger. And it's an incredibly exciting, dynamic, challenging business.
Yeah, absolutely. But then suddenly you caught on to the fact that your health wasn't so good, you weren't too happy with what you were doing, and you suddenly abandoned it all. Can you tell us about that?
One day I came home from work. I have 4 kids, and one day I came home from work, and I knocked on my son's door, who was in 8th grade at the time. I opened the door, I say, "Hi, Sam," and he kind of grunts something. And then we went to dinner, and he grunted some more stuff. And I kind of had this realization, he's in 8th grade. Next year he'll be in 9th grade. He was in a competitive high school, and that kind of barricading himself inside the room is just going to get worse. Meanwhile, I'm touring the world doing kind of what I'm doing, and I realized I was going to miss this opportunity. And if I didn't seize the moment, it would disappear and be gone forever. And so, that was kind of this insight that I had. But that led to a long conversation with my family and my wife. And it's like, look, we only go around once. So you're living to work or you're working to live. And, what are our life goals? Never mind my career goals. It's really easy to get caught up in your career. But I thought, this is where it happens. This is where men become the fathers and husbands they never intended to be. And, you carried away with the ambition and the trappings and this and that. But what really matters is the personal relationships in your lives. And especially when it comes to kids, if you miss your opportunity, it's just gone. And I didn't want to become that dad.
But we see this a lot in places of power. The people don't want to step down. In fact, the people who run our country are in their 70s.
Right.
And we see a lot of people until they are mentally incapacitated,
right,
wanting to stay where they are.
Right.
What gave you the foresight to kind of say, oh, there's only a limited window here, and I have to make an impact on my kids and also take care of myself?
Right. Well, I do think that most people hang on by their fingernails if they can, and I do think that there's a lot of ego involved, and I really, I do a lot of self-examination anyway, just as who I am. But I realized there were all sorts of trade-offs I was making, and I felt the pain. I felt the pain of like not being close to my kids and not being around for my kids.
How many hours a week were you working?
Oh, these days, I mean, everybody's always working. Every hour they're awake, they're on their phone. I mean, everybody does. It's not even the CEO anymore.
Yeah.
Everybody. So
I'm on my phone right now. Yeah.
I worked all the time, and I was traveling around the world. I probably circled the globe 4 or 5 times a year, and I was just working all the time.
It's an addictive lifestyle, though. It's pretty flossy, isn't it? Flying around the world, meeting all sorts of new people. It's pretty exciting.
Yes, it is. Part of it also was you'd meet all these exciting people, and I realized that the day-to-day experience that I was having was getting more and more divergent from the day-to-day experience my family was having. So, yes, it was exciting. I was traveling all over the world, but I'd come home and my kids would be like, well, I just did my homework, and, but, what about being a dad and being at dinner and being there for the homework instead of traveling around the world? So, look, I did it, and, what I felt about my job was, I can't believe I get to do this, right? I really...
You never imagined that growing up, that you would...
No, I mean, everybody has an ambition, like being when I grow up, I'm going to be some superstar.
Of course.
Everybody has that. And I had that too, and I had an ambition, and I went to business school, and I worked through my career, and I reached the pinnacle of what most guys in my position really strive for. And when I got there, I had this moment of, look at my day-to-day experience. It's extraordinary, the kind of people I meet and the things that I do. And yet, there were trade-offs. And part of it was just confidence, like, look, I'll go and I'll come back, and I'll figure something out. And
so you decided to take a sabbatical of sorts.
I wouldn't say of sorts. It's a real sabbatical, and I stepped aside. I told my board, I've done everything you've asked me to do. The company's in great shape. It's one of the best positioned companies in the industry. I owe my family some time, And so I stepped aside. They were not happy with me. But I stepped aside.
You did your job too well, so when you left, they weren't very happy.
Well, I mean, I'm not in the boardroom when they're talking about me, so I don't know how they actually
They didn't
felt,
want to
but I'm
replace you,
understanding.
evidently. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I kind of sort of, issued a press release, sort of said I'm leaving, and and the truth is, I became CEO almost by, not quite by accident, but it was kind of through extraordinary events. And I had a real job to do. I'm not a great caretaker CEO. I'm a great change agent, I think. And once the change had been done, it's kind of like, okay, somebody else has got to take the reins anyway. And so
transformational leadership.
There we go.
Brand of leadership.
There we go.
Absolutely. So you cut it off right there. You decided to a path diverged. So what happened next?
So I cut it off right there, but I don't want to go past that moment too quickly because first of all, I don't want to make light of it. It was a hard choice, but part of the point of all of this is making a deliberate choice about how you want to lead your life and making a deliberate a choice about what you need to leave behind in order to take something else. And there was that trade-off. It was not in any way an easy trade-off, so I don't want to be too light about it. Anyway, so we pack up our bags and we decamp. I take 4 kids out of schools in New York, and we all go move to Bali, Indonesia for the better part of a year. And
was there a particular reason you chose Bali?
Bali was kind of our second choice, actually. There's kind of this interesting moment when you sort of like turn to my wife and I was like, all right, I agree, let's go. So where do you want to go? And you kind of pull up Google Earth in the kitchen and you watch a spinning globe and it's like, all right, you start circling the globe, where do you want to go? And so, that's not a really good way to choose your destination. So we established a set of criteria, and after that criteria, something popped out, and it wasn't Bali, and then we kind of went over there. I don't want to give away the story, but, we go over there, and I sort of said, took us down to South America, and I kind of looked at my wife and I said, this is really beautiful, but it's like Connecticut in Spanish. And I'm really not interested in that. Connecticut's lovely, but it's not where I want to go for sabbatical.
You wanted it to be a learning experience.
I wanted it to be a learning experience. And so, and that was kind of the summer before we left. We left in January. And by the time we come back, it's like September, and my wife is drumming her fingers on the kitchen table and sort of saying, well, where are we going? We're leaving in a few months. Where are we going? And I happened to have talked to a friend of mine who had lived in Bali, and he said, actually, I'm sorry, it was my brother who sort of had visited Bali. He said, you have to check out Bali. Anyway, we did some research, and we ended up in Bali, and this time my wife said, no recon trip. We're going to make it great. We're just going to go. We're going to get on a plane, and we're going to go. So sight unseen, I'd never been there. Nobody had ever been there before. Sight unseen, we sort of said, okay, we're going, we'll figure it out. And because the internet is what it is, we were able to arrange for housing and all that stuff from New York and schools, which was a big part of our experience. And off we were, we went to Bali.
So I answered one audience question. The second audience question I have is, what is the biggest sacrifice you made to make this journey?
So here's like the honesty behind all this is that, when people read the book, they say, okay, what did you really sacrifice anyway? You're just you're this 1% CEO, and kind of like you get to do this, and what can I learn from that? And most people who've read the book who kind of had that reaction sort of are surprised by what they could learn from it, actually. But in my world, right, to sacrifice a big job like that, and to, never mind the money and all that stuff, but just what you work your entire career for, you get there. The truth of the matter is, you got to start all over again.
And wasn't your identity wrapped up in your work?
Totally. I mean, whose identity isn't wrapped up in their work? I mean, if you enjoy what you're doing anyway, if you hate your job, you hate your job. But if you enjoy what you're doing, your identity is wrapped up in it. And I was wrapped up in the people that were in that firm. I think there were incredibly talented people there. It was wrapped up in the brands that I was associated with. It was wrapped up in kind of my day-to-day, look, there's a lot of ego involved in being a CEO
and
of a company.
And responsibility to the people who work for you, right?
Well, the sense of responsibility, but in terms of my identification with them, it was the other way around. It was more about how I identified with them, and I took leadership I still take leadership very seriously, and I cared for them, and I cared for the company, and I never thought of myself as a boss. I thought of myself as a leader.
That's great. So our next audience question. So you moved to Bali, right? How did your kids adjust? Did they like it?
So I have 4 kids. I thought the oldest kid would have the hardest time. He was 15 at the time, and my youngest, who was 7, would have the easiest time. And he was the exact opposite. My oldest had an amazing time. My youngest kind of ended up missing her teachers and her friends, and
Sure.
she had the hardest time. And my oldest kid too. And the one thing that was really important for all of them is that they all go to schools in New York where it's kind of high pressure, and everybody's trying to
Sure.
get by a Canadian entrepreneur named John Hardy and his wife Cynthia. John Hardy is kind of a big jewelry brand, and he has a whole life story, but he comes to Bali and he just decides when he sells his company that he's going to take that money and build a school all around the love of learning and about teaching kids global citizenship and teaching kids about the environment more than anything else. So he built this gorgeous school in the jungle, all out of renewable materials, all out of bamboo. And because he's artistic, it's like cathedrals of bamboo in the middle of the jungle. This frontal teaching and teach for the test and do well. And seeing that joy come out about learning for all of them, it was just an amazing experience, and all of them experienced that. So my kids, ultimately, even the youngest one, just kind of really was eye-opening for them.
So is taking off your shoes a reference to what they do in Eastern culture when they go into a house?
I mean, the title works on a number of different levels, but yes, true. When you either enter the house or a temple or anything else, it's kind of a poem that I cite at the beginning of the book by a poet named David. Not about ambition and ego and all that, but really kind of recognizing your holy ground and changing the way you are in the world because of that recognition. But there's also this wonderful moment when David White talks about reading that poem. He talks about reading it in front of a crowd once, and this Orthodox Jewish kid or person comes over to him and he says, the Hebrew word for when the Bible says take off your shoes, the word for take off is the same word that the Bible uses for an animal shedding its skin. And in that way, it's kind of this moment of renewal, right? You take off your old self and you don a new self. And so somewhere between being barefoot all the time in Bali and kind of feeling free that way, as well as kind of that sense of shedding one's skin in order to renew in midlife, was kind of a good metaphor for me for what the journey was about and what the book is about.
So how did your wife and you adjust to Bali?
Just to Bali? I mean, honestly, you're on a tropical island where it's kind of gorgeous and
But
frankly,
you're used to a high-paced life at this point.
Yes. So before I went to Bali, the refrain I had with my wife is like, "What am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do?" I'm so used to all the stimulation.
Did you build, like, model boats, or did you have like voracious levels of hobbies?
One was I learned how to meditate and learn a more mindful way of being. I also learned how to do yoga, which is kind of, I think, more or less the same, but adds movement to the body. And then kind of the surprising thing for me is because it's a very artistic community that we lived in, I have no artistic talent at all, or no innate talent, but I taught myself how to draw and then ultimately joined an artist group there and taught myself how to draw. And today, I don't know if I'm an artist, but I do paint and I do, and I turn to art as this kind of one, not in and of itself, but just kind of having a creative outlet. And the book itself is also a piece of art to me, right? It's a creative output. And I became much more right-sided than left-sided in the way I think and the way I approach business and the way I all that has continued to have an impact on me. But when I was there, a lot of yoga, a lot of meditation, a lot of art.
Shedding some pounds there, weren't you?
I probably lost about 20 pounds.
Change of diet? Mindful eating?
Mindful eating is more a better way to say it, right? I wasn't rushing through airports. I wasn't downing food so I get to my next meeting.
The Delta Lounge for dinner.
Please, don't even.
Champagne and carrots and ranch. Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of one part of it. The other part of it is kind of really, business dinners, right? So you go to a fancy restaurant and the wine is coming and the 6 courses and the whole thing, right? And you're kind of and so all of that. So.
You start
really kind of mindful
fat around your heart and all of that.
So middle-aged men actually, they gain weight, especially stress-related weight. They gain it around their waist actually. So typically, and so I probably lost 20 pounds.
Place you're outside more, you're walking.
I'm active all the time, right? I'm even here. I'm kind of active. I'll when I'm in the city, I'm on a bike. I'm not taking cabs. I'm not taking Ubers, and I go to the gym all the time, and I'm always active. But yes, you're kind of active.
So what's your advice, and then this is another audience question, for someone who wants a dramatic change in career, life change, etc., geographical change? What is the first step that you took in your own personal change?
So I'm going to plug somebody else's book for a second.
Okay. That's allowed here.
Because what I get a lot is, oh great, you could do it, but how does somebody who's on a regular wage do it? There's a book called Escape 101, how to take a sabbatical without losing your money or your mind. And it's not written for guys like me. It's written for everybody, right? It's written for somebody who wants to make a change in their lives and doesn't think they can afford it. And the truth is, a lot of it is planning. And so there are honestly, they kind of saved up for years ahead of time. They decided this is what they were going to do, and they sort of said, okay, we're not going to go to the movies this weekend. We're going to take the money and save it. And over time, and delaying pleasure. No, and after pick it 3, 5, or more years, we'll be able to do this. And by the way, Bali is a really cheap place to live, right? You can you live on $2 a day, and there are plenty of places in the world that are much cheaper, where your dollar that you've saved over here goes a lot further over there. And it's totally doable. And so, one of the things that I discover in this trip is kind of the importance of mindset and how you approach things, and what truths do you think that should be questioned. And so I often question people, say, "Oh, I could never do it." I was like, "Really? Can you really never do it? Are you 100% sure you can never do it? What incontrovertible evidence do you have that you can never do it?" Right? Because if you really wanted to do it, you'd figure out a way.
So let's talk about the book. We always talk about the book here on Bookstr.
Weren't we doing that?
No. Let's talk about how you wrote the book, right?
Okay, yeah.
We've been talking about the book the whole time, but how did you write the
book?
All right,
good.
What were the first steps you took, etc.?
So I'm not a writer. I don't think of myself as a writer.
I'm sure you wrote a lot in business.
Well, here's the trick, right? I write in business, but when you write in business, you're writing in a very expository way, and you're trying to be very clear, and so there's no room for misunderstanding. But when you write to get into somebody's heart instead of their brain, right, you need to leave things up to the imagination. Well, it's probably that with the brain too, but so you almost necessarily need to not be explicit. Right? So if I kind of say, hey, if I want to describe a fish in an expository way, I talk about the fish and swimming around the lake and all this stuff. But if in a narrative way, I kind of focus more on kind of just a little splash and let the reader kind of imagine if there's a fish under the water. And so changing from an expository writing style to a narrative writing style was not what I normally do. And then in terms of picking it up, honestly, I got on the internet and I sort of said, like I do in most things, I really believe in putting scaffolding around me. I get a coach for anything I do. And I hired a writing coach.
Really?
And just off the internet, his name is Steve Adams. He's a wonderful guy. I've never met him. It's all been on the phone. And he gave me a few pointers up front, which were really helpful. 2 of them that I remember for your audience. One was, hey, if you imagine this thing is going to come out of your head and onto the screen, just because you have so much in there, it's not really the way it works, right? You kind of allot 3 hours, including 1 hour to kind of stare out the window, and you may only get 1 page out of those 3 hours. So that's kind of number one.
That sounds so frustrating.
And then, so he kind of did that. And he said, and the other thing is, there's so much in your head, get it all out, right? Don't kind of wait, because guys like you, everything needs to be A+ material, and just make it C+ material. And just get it out because there's too much in your head. And then the A+ stuff comes in the editing of it. And I think the editing was frankly a much more interesting process than the writing of it. Because I did that, I just got it all out, and then I edited it down and had to choose a story arc. We could talk more about that if you like, but. So those were kind of 2 real great things. And then the third thing that he just did for me instead of tell for me was we're going to have a phone call, 1 pages or 5 pages or 10 pages. You just submit it and then we'll talk about it.
A check-in.
A check-in. But for me, it's a deadline, and I respond to deadlines. So, and before you know it, it'll take time. If you're not in a hurry, I'm not in a hurry. It'll take time, but before you know it, you'll have a book. And so every 2 weeks we had a phone call.
How long did it take?
Are we including the 6 months of putting it in the drawer and forgetting about it and hoping like wine it would just get better on its own? I don't know. I felt I had a story to tell. I knew what I wanted. I sort of knew what I wanted to say. But when you write, the great thing about writing is what comes out that you weren't expecting to come out. But I knew more or less kind of what I wanted to talk about.
So, as a person in our audience wants to know what it's like to work in the video game industry, and if you have any advice for them, there's a lot of young people are interested in working in the industry.
It's an amazing industry. It is an amazing industry.
So you would highly recommend working in the video game industry?
I think it depends on what your individual goals are and what your individual skills are. My general advice for anybody is whatever you choose to do, just be great at it. Right? I mean, it almost doesn't matter what you do. If you want to be great at it, you probably need to be really passionate about it.
Sure.
And I flip on its head that advice about, do what you're passionate about. My advice to most young professionals is to flip that on its head. It's look, nobody really knows what they're really passionate about. But whatever you're doing, just be passionate about that. And just kind of, just be passionate about it. And if you're passionate about video games, great. I know it's a hard industry to get into because everybody wants to do it. But if you're an artist, a musician, a programmer, just kind of a creative director, I mean, it's so much. I think I've been in all media businesses. I think it's even more creative than the movie business or the television business. There's so much to be done, you know, I don't have any advice for getting into it. I think you just got to pound on doors and pound the pavements. What I tell my kids about getting in jobs is, it's really easy for somebody to throw their resume out the door. It's harder for them to hang up on you, and it's really hard for them to throw you out of their office. Yes. So just get in front of somebody's face.
Is that how you did it?
But don't give out my email address.
Is that how you did it when you got started?
I didn't get started in the video game business, but it's how I got. That's how I got my first job. My first job was actually, I was interested in international affairs, and I wanted to go work at the World Bank. And I had a friend there, and I said, "Look, just get me past security, and I'll take it from there." And
wow, that's impressive.
And so they called security. I got security, and I literally pounded on doors, and in 3 days I had 2 job offers.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I don't want to give away the rest of the book, of course, but
I'll do it if you don't want to.
After you take off the shoes and you're ready to put them back on, what do you do?
So that's hard, actually, because I live in New York, and New York is not Bali. And synthesizing that way of living, the Bali way of living, with the New York way of living, is a trick. And to me, that's my work. That's my work that I have to, that I think is I don't want to call it struggle, but call it a challenge. And the way I do it is to be wholehearted about everything I do. So I'm not striking balance, per se, but be fiercely engaged in everything. So, and that includes not only my job, but yoga, meditation, and art. That's my 3 practices that I've taken away.
Discipline in such a busy lifestyle.
They take discipline, and they take time, and they take commitment. And sometimes they fall apart. And like I'm always overshooting equilibrium, right? I can't think of it all together, but the demands of work obviously take priority, and then the demands of family are there. But my family understands my commitment to those 3 practices, and they give me my time to paint, and they give me my time to meditate, and they give me my time to do yoga. And all of this is really about mindfulness and breathing and mindset. And there's a lot of all of what is kind of current in a lot of leadership thinking is all in that book too, woven into my personal story. But it's not a story about Bali. I mean, I tell some people, like, Eat, Pray, Love for men. But it's not really a story about Bali. It's a story about personal and professional transformation and really becoming a different kind of leader, one that doesn't lead with ego, but leads with compassion and with empathy and with kind of presence in the room.
So one last question from the audience. How is it different writing a book than running a company? That's a good question.
I mean, gosh, they're so different. I don't know. I will tell you that no leader of a company really does it on their own. Everybody kind of thinks, Steve Jobs, for example, that's their kind of the definition of this genius CEO. And maybe he's the exception, but I think even he was the front man. There's a lot going on underneath there. So everybody's got help around them. It's big organizations, and a lot of people do a lot of things. And so it's never really you as the CEO, even though kind of the public likes to think it, and it's that's what's in the newspapers. It's like, CEO, blah, 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 and gets quoted. But there is a lot of people doing a lot of great work behind the scenes. When you're an author, it's just you. It's just like, here I am, here's me, and you're out there. And the book, for a guy of my background, it's pretty vulnerable. And so here's a lot of vulnerability. Here's a lot of my personal life out in the open, out in the wild, and no CEO does that, right? So it's all me, it's all you, whatever it is, as opposed to having my whole organization behind me and all that, and speaking points and talking points and very kind of highly crafted kind of message points when you communicate as a CEO. But when you communicate as an author, if you don't get personal, you don't get vulnerable, you're not going to get readers.
You're still very specific. You're more specific. That you're very explicit about what you mean. You've inherited that from being a CEO.
Right.
Because most people, when you get on the camera and start talking to them, they get loosey-goosey. You're like, no, this is exactly what I mean.
I think I have a lot to say about all this.
No. But a lot of people, especially when you turn on a camera and you talk to journalists, they could be misquoted. You don't look like someone that could be misquoted easily.
I don't know. We'll find out, won't we? But maybe you just haven't asked the tough questions. I don't know.
Well, anyway, Ben, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you. It was really a pleasure.
Yeah. And join us next week. We'll be back.
Thanks so much.